The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
We should start.
Okay.
And I have to introduce, although she's probably introduced herself already. This is Jean Rife, who is the curator of harpsichords at MIT. I love that title.
Clarice just dubbed me that, yes.
Partly because we have 3 instruments on campus, and Jean spearheaded this amazing activity of let's put the right harpsichord in the right place, let's refurbish them, let's treat them with the respect.
Let's get rid of some and let's get some new ones.
Yeah, so there was a real movement and action, and now we have 3 instruments that belong in the right place and do the right things, and we can now do demonstrations like this, and that's very cool.
We have, I'll talk about them, but we just have 3 new, two of them are brand new. 2 of our instruments are brand new. This one's been here since it was built in 1973, but they're for different purposes, and we'll talk about that.
It's different than the piano because the space and the instrument really do need to be matched up properly. And different types of pieces are better on different instruments. There's all kinds of wonderful variations that go along with that. Jean is also a virtuoso horn player, which is maybe you guys know and maybe you guys don't know. And she also coaches our chamber music ensembles. So thank you for coming, and I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thank you, Teresa. So glad to see you all here and know that some of you are keyboard players and will delight in trying the instruments at the end, which I expect all of you to do, keyboard players or not. So just wanted to talk a little bit about the harpsichord and its place in history. The first harpsichord was invented, they think, I mean, who knows that far back, but around 1395. So the harpsichord was in use from like around that time, 1400, to middle of the 19th century, 18 something, so it's over 400 years. The piano history kind of shrinks in comparison, doesn't it? The modern piano's been around since, what, 1860, almost what we have now, 1860s. They were developing pianos, of course, in the 18th century, but it hasn't been the primary keyboard instrument for as long as the harpsichord was. And during that time, it took many shapes. What distinguishes a harpsichord from other instruments is that the strings are plucked. And I will show you the mechanism a little bit later, but I just want to talk about the history of it and how it was developed. And in different parts of Europe, it was different shapes. It had different sounds, depending on what the sensibilities of the culture were. And they used to think, okay, there are French harpsichords that have a certain shape, and that's generally true. French harpsichords, this is called a French double. A double because there are 2 keyboards. And French because it has some of the sound characteristics in the shape, and the woods of most French harpsichords built by a couple of families that were prominent in Paris. There are Flemish harpsichords. We don't have one of those on campus, but they usually look similar to this, but the adjustments of the stops are on the side instead of inside here, generally. Italian harpsichords tend to be long, narrower than this, usually one manual, and have a more plucky sound rather than a rich, full ringing sound like the French. And then there are German ones that are not so popular in our culture. The French ones really took a lot of space in the revival of the instruments. And a harpsichord was, when the piano started being developed in the late 1700s. A harpsichord was kind of replaced by piano. Haydn could go either way. Some of his trios are equally delightful on harpsichord as they are on piano. Sometimes it's nice to play, but the piano of the time was also different from the piano now. It was much lighter. And it was, when the piano started being developed, the harpsichord was really at its peak, and the piano wasn't. So 1790s harpsichords are going to be a lot better than 1790s pianos, just they didn't quite know how to do it yet. And it was used a great deal longer as an opera continuo instrument than it was as a solo or chamber music instrument. So you find Mozart operas almost always, you'll find now with people doing things, Mozart operas, they'll have a harpsichord there. So that carried into quite late before it was really replaced by the piano. In the early 20th century, 1910, probably in the 1910s, the British started thinking, let's do some old music. And there started being a revival very shortly after Baroque music died, and the harpsichord kind of died. People started saying, that was nice music, let's bring some of it back. And Karl Dolmetsch in England started building instruments. And there were some people who would go and work with him, people who were interested, became interested in those. And he didn't really copy old instruments. Before the World Wars, there was a great belief that we're getting better and better all the time. Everything's progress, we're progressing, things are getting better and better. So what they tried to do when there was first a harpsichord revival or revival of early music was to say, okay, let's use what we know and make these instruments better than they were making them back then. So there was one school that went that way. And then people started, there was this man named Hugh Goff in Germany, I think, who said, wait a second, those are really great instruments, because there were a lot still extant in museums, in private collections, and they were hearing them and they're saying, these are beautiful. These are much more beautiful than what Dolmetsch is building. So people worked along those lines too. So there were kind of two schools in general going like that. There were a couple after the war, after the Second War, people realized not everything's getting better and better. So there was kind of a cultural change too. There were two young men, Harvard students. One was named Frank Hubbard, and he had a younger friend, they'd been friends since childhood, named William Dowd, and you can find his name right here, who got really interested in this when they were students. They were both English majors at Harvard, and they started thinking, might be interesting to build harpsichords. So they started building. One of them went to Europe. Frank Hubbard went to Europe and worked with Dolmetsch for a bit and realized he was doing nothing but getting coffee, stringing instruments, doing boring kinds of work, and said, I don't like this so much. So he went to Germany and started working with Hugh Goff. That's G-O-U-G-H. And so started doing, and what Goff was doing was going around measuring old instruments and getting exact measurements of things. Modern piano has an open bottom. Harpsichords are closed on the bottom. So Dolmetsch was doing open bottom things, and Goff was saying, that doesn't make sense. These sound different. These sound better. So during that process, Frank Hubbard started reading his notes. He he opened his books to him basically, and started getting really interested in the whole prospect and the project, and wrote his own book, 3 Centuries of Harpsichord Building, which is still available. It's in the library. It's a classic. And came back, and Dowd was doing his own research and building. They got together and rented a place in South Boston. They talk about, they had to sit by the heater until 11 o'clock in the mornings to get warm enough to go off in the corners and work. But they started building, and they actually created a movement of copying old instruments. There was someone in Germany, Skowronek, yes, who was independently doing work, and so he created a school in Europe. But the revival of instruments really centered in the US and grew up here. Meanwhile, there was a German who came to America, Zuckerman, and thought everybody should have a harpsichord. So he created the harpsichord kit business and made a very simple box and you can find these kits all over the place now. Somebody says, oh, we have an instrument at our school, but nobody's played it for 30, 40 years. And you go and it's a Zuckerman kit that was put together, no bent sides, nothing complicated. But he thought his mission was to get things out. And in the 70s, that was bought by David Way, who was a great marketer, marketed it all over the world, actually, Zuckerman harpsichords. And he also started building really beautiful harpsichords. And there are some beautiful instruments by David Way in Boston, actually, around here. Boston actually became a center for early music. So there are millions of harpsichords around here, millions of wonderful players. You can just look around, go to a lot of places and find great harpsichordists. So all these things were happening. In the 18th century, early 18th, late 17th, early 18th century, there was a time when they thought, the pianos were coming along, they had dynamics. Harpsichord is one dynamic, and you actually can increase the dynamic by adding registers, get two sets of strings going at once, or play more notes at the same time, but otherwise you can't play louder. So people would come up, in the age of invention, when harpsichord, saxophones were being developed, and sarrusophones, all kinds of instruments were being invented. They were trying to figure out how to do this, and they actually had a Venetian blind thing inside, so you could open up the keyboard. So all kinds of things happened in the history of this. So what they found was the more and more they copied old instruments, the better they were. For a while they were using plywood for soundboards, and they realized, okay, that's supposed to kind of control the shrinkage, but actually what it does is it expands in different directions at the same time, and you can't control it. And they realized that old people like Tesquin and Rookers actually knew what the woods did really well, and so copied more and more. So what can be varied now in harpsichords? The shape of the instrument. This is, a typical French shape here. You can have a square box, a virginal, which is popular in England and the Netherlands. You can have a spinet, which generally has one side that's, it's kind of a trapezoid shape. You can have narrower, long, wider. What other kinds of things? Shapes. Oh, there's a clavicitherium, and people are starting to copy those more. It's basically a harpsichord with the strings going up in the air. It's great for a small apartment with high ceilings, because it doesn't take so much floor space. So you don't have to sleep under your harpsichord, you can sleep beside it. The wires, why don't you come up here and just let me show you some of the inside.
And while we do this, you should always move around and get different vantage points and different sound vantage points, okay?
Right. We're just going to take this music desk is not an original kind of music desk. It was one of Dowd's great inventions, so it could be folded down into the instrument. So that's pretty nice. These pins are a new style. The older pins would be flatter. Harpsichord needs to be tuned sometimes every day, in New England especially. At home, mine doesn't have to be tuned more than once a week because I have a dehumidifier for the summers and a humidifier for the winters. So this comes off. What this does is, and you see it has felt on it, it stops the jacks from flying up into the air. You see, they'd come up there and not so good, right? Just sticks. Now this is going to be hard to get back in. I don't know what I did. These are called jacks. And if you look, here's the damper. There's a felt damper. There's the plectra right there. So you see, it goes up, the plectra plucks the string, and when it comes back down, there actually is a sound. If you listen really carefully, you can hear it going the other way. It's very quiet the other way. And then when you take your finger off the key, the damper will come back down most of the time. If you have this jack stop on top of it. The other thing that happens, this goes back, you see. Oh, the plectrum is important. Okay, what do you make that out of? They used crow quill back in the day. And one of the things that Hubbard and Dowd experimented with was a material called Delrin. DuPont actually was developing this plastic, and they asked Hubbard and Dowd to, try it out. So they were expecting back, a report with statistics and stuff like that. Well, they wrote back and said, wow, with Delrin, you can play 4 hours a day on the chromatic fantasy and fugue and not break a quill. So Delrin became a very popular thing. Crow quill has a different sound. And, they tried all kinds of materials. They tried leather plectra, which has a kind of a sweet sound, but you can understand what the limitations of that would be. And finally, somebody said, crow quill sounds a lot like crow quill. The problem with crow quill was that in the 50s, it broke all the time. Constantly was breaking. It doesn't so much now because we got rid of DDT. So it was breaking a lot in the 50s. I mean, they were thinking, whoa, what did those people do back then? They're all spending their whole, they're like oboists. They're always making reeds. So they're always replacing quills. But no, it was stronger. So now that we've gotten rid of DDT, people are using crow quill. But in institutional settings and a lot of homes, you will still find Delrin because it's a pretty good substitute. It does have a little curve in it. It's not completely flat, so you make sure that goes down. Oh, one other thing I forgot to show you. On the back of this is a little spring. On this, it's a little piece of wire, so that once this goes by, that will push this back. You can see it's a wire in there. That was originally boar bristle. And again, some harpsichords will get that. It doesn't really affect the sound that much. So most people are using, this is just harpsichord wire. It's just off the instrument. What I've discovered working with harpsichord builders is they are incredibly meticulous. One, half a paper's width of shaving on a part can make a huge difference in the harpsichord. In the sound, in the way it works. You see these fit very well in the guide, but they can't be too tight or they won't go down. And they have to be able to tolerate the weather change. When the wood swells, it has to be able to tolerate that. The length of that spring that I just showed you, that wire in there, makes a great deal of difference. If it's up 1 millimeter, it can change how responsive the jack is coming back. So, any questions about the inside? The wires are sometimes steel, sometimes iron, sometimes brass. So you can see this is completely strung in brass up to this point, and then he changes over to, I believe this is steel, but it might be iron. I'm not sure. And that's something else. I mean, there are people who are just making harpsichord wires now. Looking for a career, you want to build, and for a while everybody had to get rose wires, and now it's, it's something else. It goes, they're little fads, and they really get better. They make the instrument sound better. Anybody have any questions about the inside of this?
Can you engage the different stops and maybe show us?
I will do that, yeah. So, Teresa's asking about the stops. This keyboard here, the upper keyboard can move in or move out. And when it moves in, the mechanism that hits the back of the jacks moves back so it can pluck another row of, move another row of these. So I don't want to go very high, but they all move, but they strike the strings if it's back further. If it comes out here, oh, that's what it is. As you move back, you get out of the way of this one, right? You move forward, rather. So you're not engaging the front one here at all. This is called the front 8, played on the upper keyboard, so it's kind of confusing. That seems backwards to me, but from the inside it's right. It's closer to the bridge. The front 8 will have a more nasal sound, so we're not playing that at all now. If I go, you can hear that, right? That's the back 8. It's further back. And then there's a 4-foot, and they're designated 8-foot and 4-foot. That's just taken from organ. Nameology, what do you call that? What's the word? Terminology. Terminology, thanks. So that's one way you can make it louder. On the front here, I'm going to put this back on. Yeah. These are the tuning pins here. There's a tuning hammer right here. And most people will tune 1 octave, and then by ear tune from there, octaves, fourths, fifths, all the way down, all the way up, then tune the different registers. It takes about 15 minutes for somebody to tune a harpsichord. It's not like a piano. It's nowhere near as hard as a piano. And most harpsichordists don't sit there listening for beats. Piano tuners really have to do that. Harpsichordists, most of us say, okay, let's just tune, and you do it. I saw somebody tune in Sanders Theater once. It was in the middle of at the time, Banchetto Musicale concert, and the bright lights coming on in the cold weather heated up the harpsichord, so it was so out of tune that it was unbearable. And so Martin Perlman sat down, at the break and tune the whole, well, it wasn't even the break, it was between two pieces. I timed it, it was 3.5 minutes. It was fine after that, so. It's amazing what you can do under a crunch, right?
How long would the pluck
What?
the pluck,
Plectra?
how long will they last? Is it 4 hours? Is that like a normal time, or how long will these last?
You
The
mean,
Delrin,
how long will the Delrin stay in there and be playable?
yeah.
Years.
Years? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it cracks down the middle, and you can really tell by the sound. If it starts sounding funny, then okay, let's requill. So you've got this. You've got this here is called a buff stop or pot de bouffe. This is. Let's see. Can we get this? Thanks. This is leather here, and you can actually touch it if you want. So that when I move this, it will damp the string just a little bit. So it doesn't ring very much. It's also called the lute stop sometimes. So that's kind of fun to play with. Some people overuse it. Like the sound so much you end up with getting a lot of it. Here you've got, so here's 1 8 and a 4. What you notice, if you go very slowly, they come one after the other. And if I put on 2 8s and a 4, if it's really this is well-regulated harpsichord. It kind of mimics what we do when we're playing. If we're playing a big chord, generally it's like that, not like, you can hear it. Right? And you can vary the speed of those for, more lushness and stuff. This harpsichord, I have to say, this harpsichord has had a long, hard life here. It's been here over 40 years. It was built in 1973 and brought straight here. It lived for years in the chapel. And the weather in the chapel is variable, right? It gets really hot in the summer and really cold in the winter. It's damp. So this is a very, I have a big place in my heart for this instrument. It's been through a lot, and you can see it's been beat up. For a while we had a lock on it. Nobody knows where the key is now, and it does, it's useless anyway, because, when you have a lock, what do people do? They pick it and play the harpsichord anyway. And for a while we had a cover that had metal, so it got beat up a lot. I don't know what these holes got drilled for, but I'm sure Bill Dowd would be really unhappy with the finish. But when we had it rebuilt, we had all the jacks replaced. They were plastic and plastic warps. So this part had to come out. Every jack got replaced, every string got replaced, and the whole thing went from a good harpsichord to what I consider world class. I think it's as good as any harpsichord you'll find in Boston, and that's saying a lot. So, when it first got delivered, I had Peter and Christy from the library came in the summer, and I was so excited. So they came over, and Peter said, "It sounds like it's plugged in." So it really made a big difference with the sound, but it's really an upgrade to more what it was then. Let's see if there's any other toys I can show you here. I don't think so. So you see we can play with 1 8-foot, 2 8-foots, either 8-foot, the upper manual with lute, or 1 8 and a 4. That's off now, right? or 2/8 and a quarter, which is the most sound you're going to get out of it, which is quite a lot here.
If you play the upper with loops, can you also play the lower without loops?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so if you put the lute stop on,
It's just on
yeah, on this instrument, a lot of instruments will have the lute stop on the bottom manual. So every instrument is somewhat different, so you always have to check out, okay, where's the lute stop, where's the 8-foot, where's the 4-foot, and stuff. Yeah, Anthony?
Do you normally change those in the middle of a piece, or would that just be?
It depends on the piece. A piece by Ligeti, there's one, one movement straight through. It's called continuum.
Okay.
He's changing a lot, so you need a really good page turner. But most early pieces, I don't change. If I get to it, there's one piece today where I will go from one manual to the other, and you'll hear that. But mostly I'll play one piece on one stop. Any other questions about the instrument?
I'm going to ask the obvious one.
Yeah, please.
Why are the keys reversed in color?
Why are the keys reversed in color? Can't answer that. I think it's what the builder liked. Yeah. I mean, you find instruments with the light wood down here and the dark wood up here. So you find a lot of different variations of it. And that's one thing that builders really take pride in, is their choice of woods, both for sound and for beauty. So they're really building a fine piece of furniture at the same time that they're building a fine instrument. Yeah.
Do you happen to know what these keys are made out of?
I don't know woods that well, but if there were an expert here, you can see there are two kinds of wood. Also notice that underneath the keys, if you come around here, they are hollowed out. Some instruments have them even more hollowed out. Actually, the upper manual, reach through, well, just come in and touch. If you go here, well, that one, you can feel those are hollowed out a little bit there. And the upper manual also, that's to make the keys lighter.
Why are the uppers more hollowed out than the lower?
I'm not sure they are now that I put my fingers in there more.
They are.
Are they? But that's a good question. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I'm sure he had a reason, knowing harpsichord builders.
Right.
They're so meticulous, unbelievable.
It's not the length of the key. Is it because the top manual can move in and out? Would that need a different balance?
It's significantly more hollowed out.
It's possible because the keys are closer to the plucking point that they want them lighter. I know there's a Flemish virginal over, Peter Sykes, my teacher, has a Flemish virginal, and as you get to the lower, the character of it, the strings are coming here, and the plucking points get closer and closer to the keys the lower you get. So by the time you get down here in this register, they're very hard to push down, and if you get too far into the key, you can't push them down at all because the pin might be right on the other side of the board, so you need more leverage. So it's possible that, because you have less leverage here, it's a theory, not sure. And I think Mr. Dowd is dead. I think he died recently, so yeah. Mr. Hubbard died in the 70s, so Bill Dowd was around a lot longer. Okay, any other questions about mechanics? Let's get some music going. Okay.
Even as Jean plays, we should
Feel free
move.
to wander around, look, peek underneath, listen to the harpsichord from different parts of the room because it does sound different in different areas. And feel free to peek over my shoulder if you want to look at the music.
Are you using printed music or are you using your iPad?
I'm using my iPad, but it has music on it, so. Well, one piece I'm playing with music, if I get to it.
And look underneath too. The fact that this you know, and we've got a piano next to it. So we've got, you can see how it's solid here, right? And if you look under the piano, you'll see that it's rather different.
Rather different. I don't know what type of wood this is. The soundboard is generally spruce, I think, but this is, yeah. Oh, what is that called? What's this called?
The medallion?
Yeah.
The sound hole? Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah, it's like an F hole, but it's a, you know, it's, and you know, you'll see different decorations in here. Some of these harpsichords are beautifully painted. There's a woman in town, Sheridan German, who also wrote a book, but she used to make her living just painting harpsichord soundboards. Yeah, it is pretty cool. William Hyman, who was a great maker, was Jewish, and so he always put Mogen David in in his harpsichords. And when David Way copied him, he did the same. So I'm going to just play a sampling of pieces from different countries so you get an idea of what stylistic differences existed. Be aware that some of these people traveled a lot. So we'll talk about each composer a little bit as we go along. I was running out of time, but so this is William Byrd. A lot of people know him from, you know, singing. Wrote a lot of vocal music and a lot of keyboard music. These pieces are from Fitzwilliam virginal book. And I can't remember when that was discovered. It was discovered somewhere. A whole bunch of, you know, British composers, and it was collected. There are all kinds of legends around it, like somebody, you know, this guy Trajan maybe copied the whole thing in prison, except he wasn't in prison long enough to really have done that. And so there are lots of questions around, you know, what it was. There's no evidence that Queen Elizabeth I actually knew the book, even though it was named for her. She did play virginal. She was a good musician, so we know that. So legends grow up, and they're always fun. We do. So I'm going to play this with 2 8s. This is Wolsey's Wild. A lot of these have great titles. This is one of the more kind of down-to-earth titles. Wolsey's Wild is just somebody's piece of land where people like to go hunting. And you notice what the bass line's doing, okay? So bass line's very simple. A lot of variation in the writing. You hear that? I'm going to skip this next piece. And I have a 4 foot on, right? Yep. And hop to Rome. Frescobaldi was a great Roman organist. He started out at Santa Maria di Trastevere, which if you've been to Rome, it's on the other side of the Tiber River, and it's a beautiful church. I've been there. So he was organist there for a while, and then he went to Brussels, and stayed for 4 years, and came back and ended up being the organist in St. Peter's. But he was very well known. Toccata, as you know, it's a touch piece. It's improvisatory. He wrote it down, so we don't have to improvise it, but it has that feeling to it. Second. Thanks. Thank you. So you can see how he uses the sound of the harpsichord. This piece actually would be better played on the Italian harpsichord, which lives up in my office right now. So if any of you want to come and try that sometime, just send me an email and I'll give you a little private demo. What? This is the French double.
We were talking about how it fills the space, right? And that's partly the registration you've chosen, but also just the way the instrument's constructed.
It's the way the instrument is constructed and wired and voiced, which means how thick the delrin is, how it's shaped. All those little tiny details are what makes it this instrument in particular of all the instruments here will fill the space more and more beautifully. Really, it sings. It really sings. Tommy.
Were there any duets for piano and harpsichord?
What an interesting question. Elliott Carter wrote a concerto for piano and harpsichord, I think in the 60s, 50s or 60s. So that's one I know. I think there is a possibility of a lot of the keyboard duets being played. There's a C.P.E. Bach double. Isn't there a harpsichord piano, forte piano concerto also. That was one of the first pieces I ever played when I was playing early instruments. Horrible horn writing.
Well, and he learned to do that from his father. Johann would create double concertos, concerto for 4 harpsichords, right? He had a lot of fun with multiple harpsichord concertos.
Right. So Johann Jakob Froberger was German, but shortly after I think he went to Vienna, and shortly after he got his job in Vienna, he applied for a grant to go study with Frescobaldi and spent quite a bit of time with Frescobaldi. Froberger also went to England. There's a famous piece about that he wrote after he went to England. He had a horrible time in England and was robbed by pirates on his way over, and wrote a very, a lament about that event. This particular one is a meditation. Who knows French in here? A little bit? Méditation faite sur ma mort future, laquelle se joue lentement avec discrétion. So he's writing about his own future death. And at the end, he wrote, Memento mori, Froberger. So the very last note is when he dies. So he's a very, you can hear some of the influence of Frescobaldi in this meditation, but you can also hear French influence. He was a very well-traveled and very well-known and highly respected composer of his time, only recently started, being rediscovered. We don't know a lot about his life, but we do know he was around. So I'm going to do this also on 1/8. I'll try and get my foot pedal working a little bit better here. So that's, would normally have 2 repeats in it so you could enjoy it a lot longer.
Can we talk about ornaments?
Yes.
Maybe that there were a few that you added yourself, or is this all designated by Froberger?
All the ornaments are designated by Froberger in here. You have kind of a choice of whether to do them or not, and you have a choice of whether to add more. You know, ornaments come in several different styles, and you know, you've got in the bird, you have 2 little lines across the top, and I can show you that later. And there's a question about what those little things mean, and we've gotten so that if we're coming from below, we go one direction, we just do a little mordant or a trill. And if you're coming from above, you do the other direction. Sometimes if you have 2 notes together and he puts that little thing over, we'll do just this, what's that called, a coulée de tierce. You have, you know, a little thing that joins a third. We also can fill in between notes. There's lots of things we can do with ornaments. I don't like to overdo them if it cuts away from the line. You find a lot more in the French music, and I'm going to do the Louis Couperin here. This is a really interesting, you saw all the whole notes in here. So why don't you come up and look at this, because the Louis Couperin, he only lived to be 35. He published none of his music in his lifetime, but he came from a musical family, and François Couperin was his nephew, François the Great, who put out tremendous amounts of music in his lifetime. Louis was working on a different career path, but he was an organist in Saint-Gervais, in Paris eventually, and very, very talented musician, wrote a lot of different things. But this unmeasured prelude is a lot of whole notes, but there are things to point out which you've probably talked about, the lines that go where you hold these notes longer. And when you see 2 notes close together like this, almost always it's like this. When you see a chord being filled in, it's not all the same length. When you see a chord, you can do. So that's written out ornaments around a broken chord, basically. And there are other places here. Here's a little ornament. He actually writes in a little mordant here. No, I'm done with you. Sometimes you want to add a rhythm. You see, you might want to add a rhythm to that. So they just look, you know, they're all whole notes. And then there's something else I wanted to show you, which I'm not seeing right now. I think that's going to be about it. So all those kinds of things can happen. You do have a lot of freedom in here, and it's not exactly the same every time I play it. So let's just do this little prelude. This is about 3.5 minutes, so. I'm going to do just 1/8 on this. It's my favorite. Do you love that as much as I do?
Oh, yeah. You guys?
I just think it's really incredible, and it's so surprising sometimes. You just, oh my goodness, where do you get? How do you get there? It just.
Well, I think that's true. The Frescobaldi, the bird, they all have these moments of surprise. And I think, we don't expect that out of harpsichord music or these composers. Right?
Right. You get used to hearing Corelli and Vivaldi as your Baroque music, go-to people. And as great as that music is, it's not so full of surprises as this.
The other thing, as you guys have been going around the room, the sound of the instrument changes. And what I just sort of tested out for myself, the chiff, right, or the kind of resistance, you can almost hear it more in the back of the space than in the front. Or, is that, if you guys wander around. Tell me if I'm right. I just find that fascinating, how the sound can change based on where you are in the space.
Exactly, yeah. And it would sound different in a different room. I mean, I always felt like the nicest place to hear a harpsichord was in a really small space, chamber setting, but it could be pretty nice in a larger one too. Let's see, it's hard for me to choose. It was hard for me to choose this music because there's so much great music and every composer has so many different styles. I think I'd like to, well, the Buxtehude is really pretty short, so I want to just play, there's this chaconne too. Let me play the chaconne for you. This is a different kind of Louis Couperin, and I'm going to put 2 8s on for this, but I'm going to be moving a little bit from one keyboard to another for a little sound variation. This is the only piece I'm doing that in, and the chaconne, he keeps coming back. It's almost like a rondo form. You do the tune, and then you do a little in between, then you come back and do it again, and then again, and then again. So you'll hear. Oh, I didn't want that to happen. So you can hear how he really takes advantage of the low register of the instrument. And a lot of French music is like that. They really take advantage of it. Bach does it also in his, I want to wrap up, but he does it in one of his French suites. I'm leaving out all kinds of people I'd love to share with you, but you'll have a chance to hear more music. And I'm just going to play the beginning of this and then let you guys play some. This is the Allemande from the E-flat French Suite. And I'm back to 1/8. So you can hear how he uses the low register, but he's also using a steel brise to imitate lute guitar playing from earlier. They were all influenced a lot by Denis Gaultier, who was a lute composer in France and earlier. So, you know, these are all individual 16th notes, but we hold them through to create the chords. So come try and ask any questions that you'd like.
There's a resonance to the instrument that we maybe don't give it credit for, right? We always, the thing is, harpsichords never sustain, pianos do. But I think today has belied that, right? There's a sustain to this instrument that we don't necessarily give it credit for.
Right, it really does. This one especially really blossoms in the space, and you can hear that.
Sound at all, or can you, is it different to feel it?
Kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why they often play harpsichord as the instrument, right? You all got to try the organ. How's this different? Yeah, and then try again. There you go. Cool. You got the lute stop. Right? But until the key actually comes back up, you can't reiterate the sound, right? And it's a much slower, if you're used to a piano, you're not going to be able to do it as quickly as you think, right? Yeah. Cool. Well, you're in the lute now, so if you go to the right, you'll engage the other sound. There you go.
Fewer strings in total, but then each note, you don't have to tune each note.
Well, I mean, there are 3 stops on here, so every note here you'll have 3 strings for every note. But I don't know, piano, it's much more difficult to tune that, and also when you're tuning for,
It's supposed to be 1/8 or...
you put 1 times 8 foot. Oh. You went 2 times 8, or 2 times 8 plus 4 foot.
Gotcha.
You can do that.
Do many people in the Baroque talent?